see if we can unravel this from the fabulously stupid Omarosa media. First of all, apparently the fact that Brennan voted for a Stalinist who was funded by the Soviets, the Communist Party USA, was very attractive to Barack Obama, who made him CIA director. Think about that. So how did this man ever get a security clearance? I'm curious about this.
People here in the White House work hard. But John is legendary even in the White House for working hard. He is one of the hardest working public servants I've ever seen. I'm not sure he's slept in 4 years.
أنا كنت طالب والشباب لما درست عربية. Now don't tell the folks who don't speak Arabic what I said, okay?
Well, let's take a look. The Russians interfered in our election, right? Well, who was president? Who was head of the CIA? Who was national security advisor? Did nothing effective to stop the Russians from interfering in our election. They did nothing to stop China from stealing our technology. They did nothing to stop North Korea's nuclear program. And even worse, they awarded the hold it, Mark, the terrorist regime in Tehran with $150 billion, right? With $150 billion, and provided them with a pathway to nuclear weapons. Good job, boys and girls in the Obama administration.
This is unquestionably the biggest scandal, political scandal, in American history. There's not even a close second. Unbelievable what happened.
Does it amaze you, as bad as the media are, and the media in this country, I mean, I wrote a whole book on it, it really is an unfree press. Does it amaze you, though, that when you have Obama officials and other officials at the highest levels of federal law enforcement, the highest levels of our federal diplomatic corps, the State Department, and the highest levels of our intelligence agencies, working to destroy the candidacy of a candidate, then working to destroy the transition period, and still working today to destroy the presidency, and the media largely has thrown in with them? I mean, as an American citizen, you got to sit back and say, what the hell's going on here?
You know, like any American patriot, I support the free press, but as I always say, they're free to be stupid, and unfortunately they've taken us up on the offer. What's fascinating here, Mark, is there are actual transmission, texts, emails, documents out there showing there was intimate involvement of the White House in this scandal. If any entrepreneurial media person would just look at it, we have this text, the White House is running this, talking about the circumstances surrounding the investigation. Right around the time the investigation's happening, we have this other text between the players. The White House wants to know, POTUS, President of the United States in acronym, wants to know everything we're doing. We have John Brennan up on Capitol Hill saying, I gave the briefing about the case to the gang of
former CIA director.
Former CIA director. I gave the briefing, and I'm doing this in conjunction with the White House. I mean, none of this is... You can Google this. You can look on the internet and find this. It's not some special skill Dan Bongino had, and yet nobody, Mark, in the media on the left side seems even remotely curious, again, about the biggest political scandal of our time. It's really unfathomable what's going on. It's so outlandish.
It's, okay, the Russia thing didn't work, racism didn't work, recession didn't work. So now it's Ukraine, January 25th, this phone call. Does this sound familiar to you?
Yeah, this is the collusion hoax part deux. You know, this is the sequel. This is like the Empire Strikes Back to the Star Wars collusion hoax. This is another nonsense thing. I have pretty decent sources on this. Listen, this is what's going on here, right? When you're on these calls at the White House, where I worked for 5 years, it's not one or two people. It's a cabal of people on both sides that are sitting there listening.
Writing stuff down.
Writing stuff down. Do you really, because they have to take notes later on how to refer and follow up on what the president does, do you actually believe that, say, 10, 20 people heard Donald Trump sell out the United States of America, and nobody said anything until a guy who, by the way, didn't even, or a woman who didn't even hear it directly, heard it from someone else, and it's so ridiculous. I can't believe they're falling for this again.
You ask yourself, I do. How did they not take this man down, given they used every instrumentality of the federal government and the press and Congress? This one man, this outsider, who would not be taken down, and they did everything they can, and they're still doing everything they can take them down. How do you explain that?
Well, that's why I wrote the follow-up to my first book, Spygate. My first book was written on this case in more of a police file format, so you didn't have to read it like a narrative. You could jump to chapter 6, oh, let's read about this player, and then to chapter 2, wherever you wanted to start. And I found the mistake, I don't want to say mistake, I did that deliberately, but one of the things I left out is I didn't tell the whole story in a narrative format that you just laid out in a minute and a half. I lay it out very simply, like I call this a spy story for idiots.
And by the way, it reads like a spy story.
Oh, well, thank you. I tell it, the events, in a narrative format so you can read from start to finish, and I break it down very simply into here was Obama's plan A, plan B, and plan C. Of course, I make these names up just for simplicity, but you just spoke about it. They tried unmasking. Basically wiretapping in normal parlance. They tried to listen in on the Trump team's phone calls and others. What did they get? Nothing. Zip. Zero. So then when that didn't work, they move on to Plan B, using the FISA courts to formalize the spying process through our courts designed to get our terrorists and enemies of the United States. When that didn't work out, then what do? They go to the media, and they tried to use the media to build public support for a special counsel with the assistance of James Comey, and upper-level people in the FBI. And what do? They get their wish, and Bob Mueller doubles down. And now we've seen phase 4 of this. I should have added an appendix, Plan D. Now we have Jerry Nadler and the ridiculous impeachment, which is just, again, a continuous polluted river where they just will not let it go. The movie script portion, Glenn Simpson wrote this article, who is the Fusion GPS proprietor. Right? He's hired by Hillary Clinton to attack Donald Trump. Long and short of it, in a nutshell, if you read his 2007, not 2017, 2007 article in the Wall Street Journal with his wife, Mary Jacoby, and then you read the dossier, which they produced against Donald Trump, right, you're going to scratch your head and say, this sounds awfully familiar. It's the same players. In other words, they had this movie script pre-prepared. They just inserted Donald Trump's name in it and sold it to Hillary Clinton. Whatchamacallit, Paul Manafort. All of this effort by Soviets, that's actually the title of the article, ex-Soviets woo Washington, their effort to woo Manafort. All of this stuff and the inferences they make in that piece are in the dossier. In other words, I call it the movie script because they just plugged in Trump's name and used it.